Do, 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 do. Oseo, everyone. I am apparently doing my usual orange tabby self and not really paying attention to what's going on. Or have a clue what's going on because, my head hurts too much because I'm actually using my two brain cells. Oseo, everyone. I am Crow, and I will be your absent-minded broadcaster for this episode. Welcome to the show, y'all. How y'all doing today? Me? I've got a crushing headache. Partly because of the changing of the seasons. It's happening to everyone in my area that I've spoken with here of late, and it's also partly due to this frickin' game, which I very much enjoy a good hack and slash, which these games are, especially this one. But hopefully I can show you. This should have sound. This really should have sound right now. It does not. I don't understand why it doesn't have sound. I can come down here to the audio. See, music all the way. But I don't want it all the way. And go to the 70. I'll go to apply, accept, video. I've tried accepting the video and everything, like like changing the resolution, aspect ratio, shadows and all that I've found on the Steam forums. Nope. Keyboard and mouse. Windows keys definitely disabled. Reload, vent, aim. Okay. Grenade. F. Okay, so tab. I hope tab didn't do anything. Okay. There we go. So yeah. I'm if there's no sound in game, oh well. So anyways, why am I playing Space Marine? Why am I playing the Blue Boy? Why am I playing Blueberry here? I would actually prefer something else than the figureheads for a Warhammer. I don't know much about the setting besides everything possible has happened, and because it's so set so far in the humanity's future that everything that possibly can happen has happened, and humanity has just forgotten it all, and they're just piecemealing it all together, trying to rediscover. They have rediscovered stuff, lost it, rediscovered it again, lost it, invented it, lost that, reinvented it, lost it again. I only know bits and pieces on the lore, and the lore design, from my understanding, is designed to be so contradictive that nothing is true, except for one thing: no female space marine, no female marines. The dudes in power armor. See, it's just go boom boom. You're not. It's this is supposed to be slow motion. Anyways, continue. Yeah, in this intro cutscene, it's going to be all like you're fast forwarding like at 2-3 times speed. That's fast forwarding, and you're not going to be able to hear anything. I'm sorry, folks, but while that's doing that, I'm probably going to set up a audiobook. Well, I won't be able to set up an audiobook because it'll cause the video to pause. So there should be like a like Nostromo clickety clack computer stuff going on right now, but nothing. Don't understand why. I'm not getting sound. Are y'all getting sound? Because I'm not getting sound. Exterminatus, negative. Strategic deploy. Capital weaponry, negative. Liberation fleet. 5 to... Adeptus Astrates Ultra. Deploying the Ultramarines. And this plays, in my opinion, a little too fast. Yeah, by Sega, no less. Human architecture, very gothic inspired. Very gothic. Grim dark setting. Cosmic horror. See what I mean by 3-4 times speed? Incoming! Now, since there's no audio, I am going to try to set up like an audio for y'all, so give me a minute.
He made a sudden movement backward.
This is going to be totally disconnected to what's going on the video, but I'm going to interject every now and then along with the video. It's continuing the War of the Worlds that we've been listening to, so enjoy. Kind of fitting, though.
Recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Stephan Möbius. The War of the Worlds. Book 2, Chapter 3. The Days of Imprisonment. The arrival of a second fighting machine drove us from our peephole into the scullery.
Oh, by the way, I am cheating with WeMod here.
The Martian might see down upon us behind our barrier. At a later date we began to feel less in danger of their eyes, for to an eye in the dazzle of the sunlight outside, our refuge must have been blank blackness. But at the first slightest suggestion of approach, drove us into the scullery in heart-throbbing retreat. Yet, terrible as was the danger we incurred, the attraction of peeping was for both of us irresistible. And I recall now with a sort of wonder that in spite of the infinite danger in which we
Doesn't red make things explode better? Or does that mean make it go faster?
Death, we could yet struggle bitterly for that horrible privilege of sight.
They have latent psychic abilities.
They would race across the kitchen in a grotesque way between eagerness and the dread of making
power their belief systems,
and strike each other and thrust and kick within a few inches of exposure.
Get your butt back here.
The fact is that we had absolutely incompatible dispositions and habits of thoughts in action.
I'm not thinking red makes
danger
things...
and isolation only accentuated
blue makes things more powerful.
At Halifax,
he's spurging out.
I hate the curate's trick of helpless exclamation, his stupid rigidity of mind, his endless muttering.
Do a combat roll!
Vitiated every effort I made to think out a line of action and drove me at times, thus pent up and intensified, almost to the verge of craziness. He was as lacking in restraint as a silly woman. He would weep for hours together, and I verily believe that to the very end this spoiled child of life thought his weak tears in some way efficacious.
Boom, boom!
In the darkness, unable to keep my mind
off. This is just as fun as without the explosions at all.
He ate more than I did, and it was in vain. I pointed out that our only chance of life was to stop in the house until the Martians had done with their pit.
I kick you!
A time might presently come when we should need food. He ate and drank impulsively in heavy meals at long intervals. He slept little.
Ooh, PTSD, huh?
As the days wore on, his utter carelessness of any consideration so intensified our distress and danger that I had, much as I loathed doing it, to resort to threats, and at last to blows.
Going down!
Reason for a time. But he was one of those weak creatures, void of pride, timorous.
Like, just let's get on with it.
Thoughts, full of shifty cunning, who face neither God nor man, who face not even themselves.
Hope y'all are speed readers.
It is for me to recall and write these things, but I set them down that my story may lack nothing.
0 servo
Those who have
skulls.
escaped.
Yeah, that's one thing. Humanity's not so good at making
our final tragedy.
Cybernetics anymore, like robots. So it's
For
mostly
they know that what is wrong
mostly
is
cyborgs.
not what is possible to torture men.
To make a
But those
robot,
who have
they
been under the
basically
shadow,
base
who
it
have
on
gone
a
down at last to
on a
elemental
skeleton.
things, will have a wider charity.
Base it
While
on
within
a
we fought
corpse.
out our dark, dim contest of whispers, snatched food and drink, and gripping hands and blows. Without, in the pitiless
Die, Xeno heretics!
was the strange wonder, the unfamiliar routine of the Martians in the pit. Let me return to those first.
I will admit, though, that I do kind of like
After a long
the
time, I
look at the
ventured back to the
Tyranids.
peephole.
Even though
Find that the new
the only
comers
true
had been reinforced by the occupants of no fewer than three
the only-
of the fighting machines.
the only
These
true
last have brought
faction
with them
you can be
certain fresh
is humanity.
appliances that stood in
That's
an
the only
orderly
allegiance you
manner
can
about the
have
cylinder.
in
The second
a
handling machine
40K is
was now
humanity.
completed and was busied in serving one
Anybody
of the
else
novel
is
contrivances
obviously
the big machine had brought.
a Xeno lover
This was
and
a body
deserves
resembling a milk can in its
merciless
general form,
death.
above which
entered.
oscillated a pear-shaped receptacle, and from which a stream of white powder flowed into a circular basin below. The oscillatory motion was imparted.
No,
to
I don't
this
need a
by
reload.
One
I got
tentacle
inf-
of the
I
handling
got
machine.
infant ammo.
With two
Because
spatulas
it's in the shape of a
machine
helix.
was digging out
Yeah,
and filling masses
interlinking
of clay
helix.
into the pear-shaped receptacle above, while with another arm it periodically opened a door and removed rusty.
This is a
and
bolter.
blackened
These things
clinkers
should
from
be
the middle
exploding
part of
at
the machine.
the end. Because they're
Another
basically
squeezing tentacle directed the powder from the basin along a ribbed canal.
this is
towards
basically
some receiver that was hidden from me by the
micro
amount of food
RPG
dust. From this unseen receiver,
cannon.
a little thread of green smoke rose vertically into this quiet air. As I looked, the handling machine, with a faint and musical,
Anybody else got a problem with that?
extended telescopic fashion, a tentacle.
I
that had
wonder
been
if
opened
a
for
Space
mere blood
Marines can
projection.
jump without
Until its
the
end was hidden
assistance
behind
of
the mound of
like
clay.
jump jets or
In
boosters.
another second, it had lifted a bar of white aluminium into sight, untarnished as yet, and shining dazzlingly, and deposited into a growing stack of bars that stood at the side of the pit. Between sunset and starlight, this dexterous machine must have made more than 100 such bars.
You cannot harm me, for the Emperor
And a
protects.
mound of bluish dust rose steadily until it topped the side of the pit. The contrast between the swift and complex movements of these contrivances and the inert, panting clumsiness of their masters was acute, and for days I had to tell myself repeatedly that these latter were indeed the living of the two things. The curate had possession of the slit when the first men
Damn
were brought to the
fungal spawn.
I was sitting
Fungal
below,
spawns.
huddled up, listening with all my ears.
Believe it or not, yeah.
He made a sudden movement backward, and I, fearful that we were observed, crouched in a spasm of terror. He came sliding down the rubbish and crept beside me in the darkness, inarticulate, gesticulating, and for a moment I shared his panic. His gesture suggested a resignation of the slit, and after a little while...
Space Marines 2 actually does a better job at being at the zerging.
At first, I could see
at the
no
Zerg
reason for
rushing.
his frantic behavior. The twilight had now come. The stars were little and faint, but the pit was illuminated.
Put
by
your
the
damn helmet on and
fire
stop
that
being
came
such
from
a
the aluminium
dick.
making. The whole picture was a flickering scheme of green gleams and shifting rusty black shadows, strangely trying to the eyes. Over and through it all went the bats, heeding it not at all. The sprawling Martians were no longer to be seen. The mound of blue-green powder had risen to cover them from sight, and a fighting machine, with its legs contracted, crumpled and
One thing I like about this game is you're basically a walking tank.
And then,
You're better
clangor
than
of
Master
machinery
Chief.
came a drifting suspicion of human voices that I entertained at first only to dismiss.
Servo Skull!
Watching this fighting machine closely, satisfying myself now for the first
Y'all are
time
speed readers.
that the hood did indeed contain a Martian. As the green flames lifted, I could see the oily
Ah!
and the brightness of his eyes.
The true
I heard a
heroes
yell. I saw
of
a long
the setting,
tentacle
the
reaching over
guardsmen.
the shoulder of the machine to the little cage that hunched upon its back. Then something struggling violently, was lifted high against the sky, a black, vague enigma against the starlight. And as this black object came down again, I saw by the green brightness that it was a man. For an instant he was clearly visible. He was a stout, ruddy, middle-aged man, well-dressed. 3 days before he must have been walking the world, a man of considerable consequence. I could see his staring eyes and gleams of light on his studs and watch chain.
It is a glorious day for them to have actually seen, let alone spoken, to a space marine.
From the Martians.
Even a more honor to them for it being an ultramarine.
Into the scullery. The curate, who had been crouching silently with his
From what I
arm
understand, a
over his
unique
head,
thing about space
looked up as
marines
I
is
passed,
they are
cried
genetically
out quite
incapable
loudly at my
of
dissection
feeling
of him,
fear.
and came running after me.
That's what makes the
That
guardsmen
night, as we lurked in
better
the scullery,
than the
balanced
space
between our
marines.
horror and the terrible
The true heroes,
fascination
because the
sleeping
guardsmen,
had, although
they
I
know
felt the urgent need of
they
action,
know horror, they know
I tried in
fear,
vain to conceive some plan
and
of
yet they
escape.
still fight.
But afterwards, during the second day, I was able to consider our position with great clearness.
I believe there's like a
Curate,
story
I
about
found,
that.
was quite incapable of discussion. This new and culminating atrocity had robbed him of all vestiges of reason or forethought. Practically, he had already sunk to the level of an animal. But as the saying goes, I gripped myself with both hands. It grew upon my mind, once I could face the facts, that terrible as our position was, there was as yet no justification for absolute despair.
What do I get? What do I
Chief
get? What do I
chance
get?
lay in the possibility of the Martians making the
Chainsword! One of the
temporary
signatures.
or even if they kept it permanently, I might not consider it necessary to guard it, and a chance of escape might be afforded to us.
You know the sucky part is,
I
you
also
slice
weighed
and dice,
carefully
and kill the orcs here.
Away out in a direction, away
just
from
spreading their spores.
But the chances of our emerging within sight of some sentinel fighting machines seemed at first too great. And I should have had to do all the digging myself. The curate would certainly have failed me. It was on the third day, if my memory serves me right, that I saw the lad killed. It was the only occasion on which I actually saw the Martians.
We're going to have to get some flamers in here.
After
What,
that
salamanders?
experience, I avoided the hole in the wall for the better part of the day.
Leave these guys
I went
around
into the
too
scullery,
long.
Removed the door, and spent some hours digging with my hatchet as silently as possible. But when I had made a hole about
And they're going to cause
collapsed noises,
more
and I did not
a...
dare continue.
Oh, just hold
I
it.
lost
I was
heart
clicking.
and lay down on the scullery floor for a long time, having no spirit even to move.
Leave these guys around and you're going to have
After
an
that, I abandoned
infestation.
altogether
Where
the
there's
idea of
one,
escaping
there will
excavation.
soon be thousands.
It says much for the impression the Martians
They
have
reproduce
made upon me
asexually.
that at first I entertained little or no hope of our escape being brought about by their overthrow through any human effort. But on the fourth or fifth night I heard a sound like heavy guns. It was very late,
Ammo!
and the moon was shining brightly. The Martians
be
had
able to
taken
open
away
this,
the
but
excavation machine.
considering how long
Several
humanity's
fighting
been at
machines had stood
war,
in the remoter bank of the pit, and
the
a
point
handling
where
machine
they
was
know
buried
nothing
out
else.
Of my sight in a corner of the pit immediately beneath my peephole, the place was deserted by them. Except for the pale glow from the handling machine and the bars and patches of white moonlight, the pit was in darkness, and except for the clinking of the handling machine, quite still. That night was a beautiful serenity. Save for one planet, the moon seemed to have the sky to herself. I heard a dog howling.
You're rank
That
ass
familiar
over
sound
here,
it was
Zeno.
that made me listen. Then I heard quite distinctly a booming exactly like the sound of great guns, 6 distinct reports.
Squig!
And after a long interval, 6 again. And that was all. End of chapter 3 in book 2.
This is
Come
a
on, you
LibriVox
two.
recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
They go
This
boom real
recording is
nice.
by Jean Crevier, Mohawk, New York, January 9th, 2006. War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, Book 2.
Die.
It was on the 6th day of our imprisonment that I peeped for the last time, and presently found myself alone. Instead of keeping close to me and trying to oust me from the slit, the curate had gone back into the scullery. I was struck by a sudden thought. I went back quickly
And
and
these
quietly
guys are
into
just
the
for
scullery.
health if you
In the
need
darkness I heard the curate drinking. I snatched at the darkness, and my fingers caught a bottle of Burgundy. For a few minutes there was a tussle. The bottle struck the floor and broke, and I desisted and rose. We stood panting and threatening each other. In the end I planted myself between him and the food, and told him of my determination to begin a discipline. I divided the food in the pantry into rations to last us 10 days. I would not let him eat any more that day. In the afternoon he made a feeble effort to get at the food. I had been dozing, but in an instant I was awake. All day and all night we sat face to face, I weary but resolute, and he weeping and complaining of his immediate hunger. It was, I know, a day and a night, but to me it seems now, an interminable length of time. And so our widened incompatibility ended at last in open conflict. For 2 vast days we struggled in undertones and wrestling contests. There were times when I beat and kicked him madly, times when I cajoled and persuaded him, and once I tried to bribe him with the last bottle of Burgundy, for there was a rainwater pump from which I could get water. But neither force nor kindness availed. He was indeed beyond reason. He would neither desist from his attacks on the food, nor from his noisy babbling to himself. The rudimentary precautions to keep our imprisonment endurable he would not observe. Slowly I began to realize the complete overflow of his intelligence. I perceived that my sole companion in this close and sickly darkness was a man insane. From certain vague memories, I am inclined to think my own mind wandered at times. I had strange and hideous dreams whenever I slept. It sounds paradoxical, but I am inclined to think that the weakness braced me and kept me a sane man. On the 8th day he began to talk aloud instead of whispering, and nothing I could do would moderate his speech. "It is just, O God," he would say, over and over again. "It is just. On me and mine be the punishment laid. We have sinned, we have fallen short. There was poverty, sorrow. The poor were trodden in the dust, and I held my peace. I preached acceptable folly. My God, what folly! When I should have stood up, though I died for it, and called upon them to repent. Repent! Oppressors of the poor and needy.
Oddly enough, War of the Worlds just kind of fits with this.
Then he would suddenly
revert
to the matter of the food.
A little
I
archaic.
withheld from him, praying, begging, weeping, at last threatening. He began to raise his voice. I prayed him not to. He perceived a hold on me. He threatened he would shout and bring the Martians upon us. For a time that scared me, but any concession would have shortened
What's the upgrade?
Escape
Purifying seal.
I defied him, although I
Rage
had no
me!
assurance.
We got a furry!
Do this thing.
We have our furry!
That day, at any rate, he did not.
He can go feral.
He talked with his voice rising slowly.
We shall purify the furries!
8th and 9th days. Threats, entreaties mingled with it.
Probably closest she'll get is probably
always
the
fought the repentance for his
space
vacant sham
wolves.
of God's service, such as made me pity him. Then he slept a while, and began again with renewed strength, so loudly that I must needs make him desist. "Be still," I implored. He rose to his knees, for he had been sitting in the darkness near the copper. "I have been still too long," he said in a tone that must have reached the pit. "And now I must bear my witness. Woe unto this unfaithful city! Woe! 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 Woe!
Oh no, we got diggers!
Inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet."
Okay, what options?
"Shut up," I said, rising to my feet,
Not
and
options.
in a terror lest the Martians should
Combat
hear us. "For God's sake!"
controls.
"Nay!" shouted the curate, at the top of his voice, standing likewise and extending his arms. "Speak! The word of the Lord is upon me." In 3 strides
So
he was at the door
E
leading
is
into the kitchen.
execution.
"I must bear witness. I go. It has already been too long
Chainsword.
delayed."
Execution.
I put out my hand and felt the meat chopper hanging to the wall. In a flash I was after him. I was fierce with fear. Before he was halfway across the kitchen, I had overtaken him. With one last touch of humanity, I turned the blade back and struck him with the butt. He went headlong forward and lay stretched on the ground. I stumbled over him and stood panting. He lay still.
So that's how you zoom.
Suddenly I heard a noise without, the run and smash of slipping plaster, and the triangular aperture in the wall was darkened. I looked up and saw the lower surface of a handling machine coming slowly across the hole. One of its gripping limbs curled among the debris. Another limb appeared, feeling its way over the fallen beams. I stood petrified, staring. Then I saw through a sort of glass plate near the edge of the body, the face, as we may call it, and the large dark eyes of a Martian peering,
Okay, so
and
that...
then a long metallic snake of tentacle came feeling slowly through.
Come here!
I turned back,
Robo-hit.
stumbled over the cure.
I failed a robo...
The tentacle
It's
was
not
now
a failed,
2 yards or
because
more in the room,
actually
and
works.
twisting and turning with queer sudden movements this way and that. For a while I stood.
The tech priests know what they're doing when they make those.
Then, with a faint hoarse cry,
I wonder what the
forced myself
failure
across
rate
the
is,
scullery.
though.
I trembled violently.
Because not every body takes to
I opened the door of the coal cellar and stood there in the darkness, staring at the faintly lit doorway into the kitchen and listening. Had the Martian seen me? What was it doing now? Something was moving to and fro there, very quietly. Every now and then,
I'm going to try to do that as much
the
as
wall,
possible.
or started on its movements with a faint metallic ringing, like the movements of keys on a split ring. Then a heavy body, I knew too well what, was dragged across the floor of the kitchen toward the opening. Irresistibly attracted, I crept to the door and peeped in the kitchen. In the triangle of bright outer sunlight, I saw the Martian, in its briarus of a handling machine, scrutinizing the curate's head. I thought at once it would infer my presence from the mark of the blow I had given him. I crept back to the coal cellar, shut the door, and began to cover myself up as much as I could, and as noiselessly as possible in the darkness, among the firewood and coal therein. Every now and then I paused rigid, to hear if the Martian had thrust his tentacle through the opening again. Then the faint metallic jingle returned. I traced it slowly, feeling over the kitchen. Presently I heard it nearer, in the scullery as I judged. I thought that its length might be insufficient to reach me. I prayed copiously.
Options.
It passed, scraping faintly across the cellar door. An age of almost intolerable suspense intervened. Then I heard it fumbling at the latch. It had found the door. The Martians understood doors. It worried at the catch for a minute, perhaps, and then the door opened.
I gotta stop clicking.
In the darkness I could just see the thing, like an elephant's trunk more than anything else, waving toward me and touching and examining the wall, coals, wood, and ceiling. It was like a black worm swaying its blind head to and fro. Once even, it touched the heel of my boot. I was on the verge of screaming.
Oh, what a lovely pile.
For a time the tentacle was
Wonder how high we can get it.
I could have fancied it had been withdrawn. Presently, with an abrupt
No,
click,
you go down.
it gripped something.
No, the
I thought
pile
it had,
calls.
and
It
seemed
wants
to go out
more.
of the cellar again. For a minute I was not sure.
We need
Apparently, it had
a
taken
lovely
lump of coal
pile.
to examine. I seized the opportunity of slightly shifting my position, which had become cramped, and then listened. I whispered passionate prayers for safety. Then I heard the slow, deliberate sound creeping toward me again. Slowly, slowly it drew.
I guess I was supposed to use this.
Against the walls.
Oh well.
Furniture. While I was still doubtful, it rapped smartly against the cellar door and closed it. I heard it go into the pantry, and the biscuit tins rattled and a bottle smashed, and then came a heavy bump against the cellar door, then silence that passed into an infinity of suspense. Had it gone? At last I decided that it had. I came into the scullery no more, but I lay all the 10th day in the close darkness, buried among coals and firewood, not daring even to crawl out for a drink, for which I craved.
Don't toss that down! You can still use it!
Day before I ventured so far from my security. End of chapter 4.
So, we basically got our sniper. Oh, grand.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please contact LibriVox.org.
Yeah, look at that texture.
War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Book 2, Chapter 5. The Stillness. My first act, before I went into the pantry, was to fasten the door between the kitchen and the scullery. But the pantry was empty. Every scrap of food had gone. Apparently the Martian had taken it all on the previous day.
Ooh, that explode real nice!
I despaired for the first time. I took no food or no drink either on the 11th or the 12th day. At first my mouth and throat were parched, and my strength ebbed sensibly. I sat about in the darkness of the scullery in a state of despondent wretchedness. My mind ran on eating. I thought I had become deaf, for the noises of movement I had been accustomed to hear from the pit had ceased absolutely. I did not feel strong enough to crawl noiselessly to the peephole, or I would have gone there. On the 12th day my throat was so painful that, taking the chance of alarming the Martians, I attacked the creaking rain-water pump that stood by the sink, and got a couple of glassfuls of blackened and tainted rain-water. I was greatly refreshed by this, and emboldened by the fact that no inquiring tentacle followed.
I wonder if they vaulted up on this.
During these days,
the foundation
in a
right here would
rambling
crack.
and conclusive way, I thought much of the curate and of the manner of his death. On the 13th day I drank some more water, and dozed, and thought disjointedly of eating, and of vague,
Saving
impossible
content. Please don't
plans
turn
of
off your
escape.
system.
Whenever I dozed, I dreamt of horrible phantasms, of the death of the curate, or of sumptuous dinners. But asleep or awake, I felt a keen pain that urged me to drink again and again. The light that came into the sky
Incoming!
was grey but red. To my disordered imagination it seemed the colour of blood. On the 14th day I went into the kitchen, and I was surprised to find that the fronds of the red weed had grown right across the hole in the wall, turning the half-light of the place into a crimson-coloured obscurity. It was early on the 15th day that I heard a curious, familiar sequence of sounds in the kitchen, and, listening, identified it as the snuffing and scratching of a dog. Going into the kitchen, I saw a dog's nose peering in through a break among the ruddy fronds. This greatly surprised me. At the scent of me, he barked shortly. I thought if I could induce him to come into the place quietly, I should be able, perhaps, to kill and eat him, and in any case it would be advisable to kill him, lest his actions attracted the attention of the Martians. I crept forward, saying, "Good dog," very softly, but he suddenly withdrew his head and disappeared.
Dogs seem to know your
But
intentions.
certainly the pit was still. I heard a sound like the flutter of a bird's wings, and a horse croaking, but that was all. For a long while I lay close to the peephole, but not daring to move aside the red plants that obscured it. Once or twice I heard a faint pitter-patter, like the feet of the dog going hither and thither on the sand far below me, and there were more bird-like sounds, but that was all. At length,
Potshots.
encouraged by the silence, I looked out. Except in the
Things
corner,
go boom real nice.
hopped and fought over the skeletons of the dead the Martians had consumed. There was not a living thing in the pit. I stared about me, scarcely believing my eyes.
It's that red weed.
All the machinery had gone, save for the big mound of greyish-blue powder in one corner, certain bars of aluminium in another, the black birds, and the skeletons of the killed. The place was merely an empty circular pit in the sand. Slowly I thrust myself out through the red weed, and stood upon the mound of rubble. I could see in any direction save behind me to the north, and neither Martians nor sign of Martians.
I know, force of habit.
The pit dropped sheerly from my feet, but a little way along the rubbish afforded a practicable slope.
Still, if red is supposed to increase power and all,
escape had come.
And if I hit it,
I began to tremble.
You'd think they would have learned by now.
For some time,
they kind of have
then,
collectiveness about it. You'd think they would have
and
learned.
A heart that throbbed violently, I scrambled to the top of the mound in which I had been buried so long. I looked about again. To the northward, too, no Martian was visible. When I had last seen this part of Sheen in the daylight, it had been a straggling street of comfortable white and red houses, interspersed with abundant shady trees. Now I stood on a mound of smashed brickwork, clay, and gravel, over which spread a multitude of red cactus-shaped plants, knee-high.
And if their blood is red, and if I get red, doesn't that mean I get faster?
The trees near me were dead and brown, but further, a network of red thread scaled the still living stems. The neighbouring houses had all been wrecked, but none had been burned. Their walls stood sometimes to the second story, with smashed windows and shattered doors.
I wouldn't mind checking out that game, Vivisector.
Tumultuously in their roofless rooms. Below me was the great pit, with the crows struggling for its refuse.
Saving content.
A number of other birds hopped about among the ruins.
Here.
Far away,
got basically another brain controlling this servitor.
Slink crouchingly along a wall, but traces of men there were none. The days seemed, by contrast with my recent confinement,
jump pack, jump jets.
Bright. The sky a glowing blue. A gentle breeze kept the red weed that covered every scrap of unoccupied.
I want my hammer, though.
Gently swaying, and oh, the sweetness of the air. End of Book 2, Chapter 5. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please contact LibriVox.org. War of the Worlds by H. G. Wells. Chapter 6. The Work of 15 Days. For some time I stood tottering on the mound, regardless of my safety. Within that noisome den from which I had emerged, I had thought with a narrow intensity only of our immediate security. I had not realized what had been happening to the world, had not anticipated this startling vision of unfamiliar things. I had expected to see Sheen in ruins. I found about me the landscape weird and lurid of another planet. For that moment I touched an emotion beyond the common range of men, yet one that the poor brutes we dominate know only too well. I felt as a rabbit might feel, returning to his burrow and suddenly confronted by the work of a dozen busy navvies digging the foundations of a house. I felt the first inkling of a thing that presently grew quite clear in my mind, that oppressed me for many days, a sense of dethronement, a persuasion that I was no longer a master, but an animal among the animals, under the Martian heel. With us it would be as with them, to lurk and watch, to run and hide. The fear and empire of man had passed away. But so soon as this strangeness had been realized, it passed, and my dominant motive became the hunger of my long and dismal
Let's
fast.
go over here. I always
In the
went that
direction
way.
away from the pit,
Y'all
I
could
saw,
survive.
beyond a red-covered wall, a patch of garden ground unburied. This gave me a hint, and I went knee-deep, and sometimes neck-deep in the red weed. The density of the weed gave me a reassuring sense of hiding. The wall was some 6 feet high, and when I attempted to clamber it, I found I could not lift my feet to the crest. So I went along by the side of it, and came to a corner and a rockwork that enabled me to get to the top.
I'm going to have to get on another platform.
I coveted. Here I found some young onions, a couple of gladiolus bulbs, and a quantity of immature carrots, all of which I secured, and, scrambling over a ruined wall, went on my way through
explosions
and trees towards Kew. It was like walking through an avenue of gigantic blood drops, possessed with 2 ideas: to get more food and to limp as soon and as far as my strength permitted out of this accursed, unearthly region of the pit. Some way farther, in a grassy place, was a group of mushrooms, which also I devoured, and then I came upon a brown sheet of flowing, shallow water where meadows used to be.
Okay, who's still doing the boom boom?
Fragments of nourishment served only to whet my hunger. At first I was surprised at this flood in a hot, dry summer, but afterwards I discovered that it was caused by the tropical exuberance of the red weed.
You two coming?
Directly this extraordinary growth encountered water, it straightway became gigantic and of unparalleled fecundity. Its seeds were simply poured down into the water of the Wey and Thames, and
let's get rid of the one thing.
Water fronds speedily choked.
Get rid of the jump jet pack,
Putney
which
saw the
you could
bridge
actually
was
use to,
almost lost in a tangle of this weed,
which would actually help.
The Thames water poured in a broad and shallow stream across the meadows of Hampton.
Hey, great logic there, Titus.
The weed followed them until the ruined villas of the Thames Valley were for a time lost in this red swamp, whose margin I explored, and much of the desolation the Martians had caused was concealed. In the end, the red weed succumbed almost as quickly as it had spread. A cankering disease.
Believe it or not, this is how the orcs get planet side. They actually hollow out an asteroid
now,
and
by the action of
drop down into it.
All terrestrial plants
go planet side.
Resisting power against bacterial diseases. They never succumb without a severe struggle, but the red weed rotted like a thing already dead. The fronds became bleached, and then shriveled and brittle. They broke off at the least touch, and the waters that had stimulated their early growth carried their last vestiges out to sea. My first act on coming to this water was, of course, to slake my thirst. I drank a great deal of it, and, moved by an impulse, gnawed some fronds of red weed, but they were watery and had a sickly, metallic taste. I found the water was sufficiently shallow for me to wade securely.
Destroy the guns!
The weed impeded my feet a little, but the flood evidently got deeper towards the river.
If the Emperor wills it.
To Mortlake.
Vengeance launcher!
The road by means of occasional ruins of its villas and fences and lamps. And so, presently, I got out of this spate and made my way to the hill going up towards Roehampton, and came out on Putney Common.
I wonder what this writ says.
The scene changed from the strange and unfamiliar to the wreckage of the familiar.
Probably in binary,
Patches
the
of ground
Mechanicus is
exhibited the devastation of a cyclone, and in a few score yards I would come upon perfectly undisturbed spaces. Houses with their blinds trimly drawn and doors closed, as if they had been left for a day by the owners, or as if their inhabitants slept within. The red weed was less abundant. The tall trees along the lane were free from the red creeper. I hunted for food among the trees, finding nothing, and I also raided the cupboards, but they had already been broken into and ransacked. I rested for the remainder of the daylight in a shrubbery, being, in my enfeebled condition,
of course we got to talk about it,
to push on. All this time I saw no human beings and no signs of the Martians. I encountered a couple of hungry-looking dogs, but
fear my vengeance!
circuitously away from the advances I made them. Near Roehampton I had seen 2 human skeletons, not bodies, but skeletons, picked clean, and in the wood by me I found the crushed and scattered bones of several cats and rabbits, and the skull of a sheep. But though I gnawed parts of these in my mouth, there was nothing to be got from them. After sunset I struggled on along the road toward Putney, where I think the heat ray must have been used.
Not bad for a single shot, even though it is
and in the garden
supposed to be a
beyond
sniper.
Roehampton, I got a quantity of immature potatoes, sufficient to stay my hunger. From this garden one looked down on Putney and the river. The aspect of the place in the dusk was singularly desolate.
It's an acceptable
Blackened, desolate ruins,
slug
and down the hill,
an acceptable
the sheet of
slug
the flooded
shotgun.
river, red tinged with the weed,
An acceptable slug thrower.
and over all silence. It filled me with indescribable terror to think how swiftly that desolating change had come. For a
the red
time,
weed.
I believed that mankind had been swept out of
When I
existence.
originally read it, like the first
And
5,
that
7
Hitler
times, I had no idea the connection
last
to the
man
red weed
left
had,
alive.
or what it
Hard by the top of
had with the
Putney
Martians
Hill,
or
I
anything.
came upon another skeleton, with the arms dislocated and removed several yards from the rest of the body. As I proceeded, I became more and more
Squig!
convinced that the extermination of mankind was, save for such stragglers as myself, already accomplished in this part of the world. The Martians, I thought, had gone on and left the country desolated, seeking food elsewhere. Perhaps even now they were destroying Berlin,
Servitor!
Paris, or it might be they had gone northward. End of Book 2, Chapter 6.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to...
Oh,
you can
crap.
volunteer.
I just remembered.
Please
Give me a minute,
visit
folks. I need to
Recorded by Chip
put
in
the
Tampa, Florida,
licensing
January 9th,
into
2007. The War of the Worlds
the
by
licensing
H.G.
of
Wells. Book 2,
licensing
Chapter 7.
info on
The
a
Man on Putney Hill.
of the audiobook into this.
I spent that night in the inn
Into
that
the,
stands at the
description.
top of Putney Hill, sleeping in a made bed for the first time since my flight to Leatherhead. I will not tell the needless trouble I had breaking into that house. Afterward I found the front door was on the latch, nor how I ransacked every room for food until, just on the verge of despair in what seemed to me to be a servant's bedroom, I found a rat-gnawed crust and 2 tins of pineapple. The place had already been searched.
There we go. That should work.
In the bar, I afterwards found some biscuits and sandwiches that had been overlooked. The latter I could not eat. They were too rotten, but the former not only stayed my hunger, but filled my pockets.
I know I don't need it, but it's...
Fearing some Martian might come...
I just can't resist Shiny!
London for food in the night.
It's that
Before I
klepto
went
kitty
to
in
bed,
me.
I had an interval of restlessness and prowled from window to window,
Shiny just
peering
says,
out
mine.
for some sign of these monsters. I slept little.
Squig!
As I lay in bed, I found myself thinking consecutively, a thing I do not remember to have done since my last argument with the curate. During all the intervening time, my mental condition had been a hurrying succession of vague emotional states, or a sort of stupid receptivity. But in the
Did I
night,
get you?
my
Nope.
brain,
There.
reinforced, I
Usually
suppose,
2
by
shots.
the food I had eaten, grew clear again. And I thought. 3 things struggled for possession of my mind: the killing of the curate, the whereabouts of the Martians, and the
No Xenos shall survive this
former
encounter.
gave me no sensation of horror or remorse to recall.
Emperor willing.
Saw it simply as a
And the
thing done.
Squig!
A memory infinitely disagreeable, but
Squig!
without
Squig!
quality of
Squig!
remorse. I saw myself then, as I see myself now, driven step by step toward that hasty blow, the creature of a sequence of accidents leading inevitably to that.
I'm taking a red means
Yet the memory...
it explodes better, it does more damage.
In the silence of the night, with
it's all around.
Nearness of God.
Why the heck would they allow it when enemies are around? Because that would make it...
I stood my trial, my only trial.
Allow us to
of wrath and fear. I retraced every step of our conversation from the moment when I had found him crouching beside me, heedless of my thirst and pointing to the fire and smoke that
yeah, be right with y'all.
The ruins of Waverley.
I just need to make sure there is not a servitor around.
Grim chance had taken no heed of that.
Look
had
at
I
those shells.
Foreseen, I should have left him at Halifax.
Little crew team, service crew team, just to load it.
To foresee
and there are
and I set this down
Warhammer 40k. If 40k has nothing else, if humanity has nothing else in 40k, it's a wealth of manpower.
I set it down, and the reader must form his judgment as he will. And when, by an effort, I had set aside the picture of a prostrate body, I faced the problem of the Martians and the fate of my wife. For the former I had no data. I could imagine 100 things, and so, unhappily,
push,
for the latter.
Push.
Suddenly that night...
Yeah, they are that strong.
Terrible.
Space Marines are basically living
sitting
tanks.
Up in bed, staring at the dark. I found myself praying that the heat ray might have suddenly and painlessly struck her out of being. Since the night of my return from Leatherhead, I had not
destroy the gun battery.
I had uttered prayers, fetish prayers, had prayed as heathens mutter charms when I was in extremity, but now I prayed indeed, pleading steadfastly and sanely, face to face with the darkness of God. Strange night. Strangest in this, that so soon as dawn had come, I, who had talked with God, crept out of the house like a rat, leaving its hiding place, a creature scarcely larger, an inferior animal, a thing that for any passing whim of our masters might be hunted or killed. Perhaps they also prayed confidently to God. Surely, if we have learned nothing else, this war has taught us pity. Pity for those witless souls that suffer our dominion. The morning was bright and fine, and the eastern sky glowed pink and was fretted...
Oh, you issue a challenge!
In the road that runs from the top of...
I accept your battle!
...was a number of poor vestiges of the panicked torrent that
I think yellow's protection.
Londonward on the Sunday
because those
fighting
ones
began.
with the yellow shoulder pads were a little bit more difficult to take down.
Inscribed with the name Thomas Lobb, Greengrocer, New Malden, with a smashed wheel.
Greengrocer, that is a vegetable
There was a
salesman, I believe.
Trampled into the now hardened mud. And at the top,
the butcher would be a one that sells
glass about the overturned
cuts and sells meat.
My movements were languid, my plans of the vaguest. I had an idea of going to Leatherhead, though I knew that
where this
there
servitor
I had
is.
The poorest chance of finding my wife. Certainly, unless death had overtaken them suddenly, my cousins and she would have fled thence, but it seemed to me I might find or learn there whither Surrey people had fled. I knew I wanted to find my wife. My heart ached for her and the world of men, but I had no clear idea how the finding might be done. I was also sharply aware now of my intense loneliness. From the corner I went, under cover of a thicket of trees and bushes, to the edge of Wimbledon Common, stretching wide and far. That dark expanse was lit in patches by yellow gorse and broom. There was no red weed to be seen, and as I prowled, hesitating on the verge of the open, the sun rose, flooding it all with light and vitality. I came upon a busy swarm of little frogs in a among the trees. I stopped to look at them, drawing a lesson from their stout resolve to live. And presently, turning suddenly with an odd feeling of being watched, I beheld something crouching amid a clump of bushes. I stood.
It's an ambush!
I made a step toward it, and it rose up and became a man armed with a cutlass. I approached him slowly. He stood silent and motionless, regarding me. As I drew nearer, I perceived he was dressed in clothes as dusty and filthy as my own. He looked, indeed,
Just
as
call
though
me
he had been
Sparky.
dragged to a culvert.
You know, that's my shield coming back.
Nearer, I distinguished the green slime of ditches mixing with the pale drab of dried clay and shiny coaly patches. His black hair fell over his eyes, and his face was dark and dirty and sunken, so that at first I did not recognize him. There was a red cut across the lower part of his face. "Stop!" he cried, when I was within 10 yards of him, and I stopped. His voice was hoarse. "Where do you come from?" he said. I thought, surveying him. "I come from Mortlake," I said. "I was buried near the pit the Martians made about their cylinder. I've worked my way out and escaped." "There's no food about here," he said. "This is my country. All this hill down to the river and back to Clapham and up to the edge of the common. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?" I answered slowly. "I don't know," I said. "I have been buried in the ruins of a house 13 or 14 days. I don't know what has happened." He looked at me doubtfully, then started and looked with a changed expression. "I have no wish to stop about here," said I. "I think I shall go to Leatherhead, for my wife was there." He shot out a pointing finger. "It's you," he said, "the man from Woking. And you weren't killed at Weybridge?" I recognized him in the same moment. "You're the artilleryman who came into my garden." "Good luck," he said. "We are lucky ones. Fancy you." He put out a hand, and I took it. "I crawled up a drain," he said, "but they didn't kill everyone. And after they went away, I got off toward Walton across the fields, but it's not 16 days altogether, and your hair is grey." He looked over his shoulder suddenly. "Only a rook," he said. "One gets to know that birds have shadows these days. This is a bit open. Let's crawl under those bushes and talk." "Have you seen any Martians?" I said. "Since I crawled out, they've gone away across London," he said. "I guess they've got a bigger camp there. Of a night, all over there, Hampstead way, the sky's alive.
Left control.
It's like a great city, and in the glare you can just see them moving. By daylight you can't, but nearer, I haven't seen them." He counted on his fingers. 5 days. Then I saw a couple cross Hammersmith way carrying something big, and the night before last," he stopped and spoke impressively, "it was just a matter of lights, but it was something up in the air. I believe they built a flying machine and are learning to fly." I stopped, on hands and knees, for we had come to the bushes. "Fly?" "Yes," he said, "fly." I went on into a little bower and sat down. "It's all over with humanity," I said. "If they can do that, they will simply go round the world." He nodded. "They will. But it will relieve things over here a bit, and besides," he looked at me, "aren't you satisfied it is up with humanity?" "I am. We're down. We're beat." I stared. Strange as it may seem, I had not arrived at this fact, a fact perfectly obvious so soon as he spoke. I had still held a vague hope. Rather, I had kept a lifelong habit of mind. He repeated his words, "We're beat." They carried absolute conviction. "It's all over," he said. "They've lost one. Just one. And they've made their footing good and crippled the greatest power in the world. They've walked over us. The death of that one at Weybridge was an accident. And these are only pioneers. They kept on coming. These green stars. I've not seen one these 5 or 6 days, but I've no doubt they're falling somewhere every night. Nothing's to be done. We're under. We're beat." I made him no answer. I sat staring before me, trying in vain to devise some countervailing thought. "This isn't a war,"
Crush 'em,
said the
run 'em
artilleryman.
over.
"It was never a war any more than there's war between man and ants." Suddenly I recalled that night in the observatory. After the 10th shot, they fired no more, at least until the first cylinder came. "How do you know?" said the artilleryman. I explained. He thought. "Something wrong with the gun," he said. "But what if there is? They'll get it right again. And even if there's a delay, how can it alter the end? It's just men and ants. There's the ants builds their cities, live in their cities, have wars, revolutions, until the men want them out of their way. And then they go out of the way. That's what we are now. Just ants.
Guess I'm sticking with this.
Only, yes,
The game wants me to play with this. I'll play with this.
we're eatable ants."
Eatable. Edible.
We sat looking at each other. "And what will they do with us?" I said. "That's what I've been thinking," he said. "That's why I've been thinking. After Weybridge, I went south, thinking. I saw what was up. Most of the people were hard at it, squealing and exciting themselves, but I'm not so fond of squealing. I've been on the side of death once or twice. I'm not an ornamental soldier, and at the best and worst, death, it's just death. Then it's the man who keeps on thinking comes through. I saw everyone tracking away south. Says I, food won't last this way, and I turned right back. I went for the Martians like a sparrow goes for man, all round." He waved a hand to the horizon. "They're starving in heaps, bolting, treading on one another." He saw my face and halted awkwardly. "No doubt lots had money, had gone away to France," he said. He seemed to hesitate whether to apologize, met my eyes, and went on. "There's food all about here. Canned things in shops, wine, spirits, mineral waters, and the water mains and drains are empty. Well, I was telling you what I was thinking. Here's intelligent things," I said, "and it seems they want us for food. First they'll smash us up. Ships, machines, guns, cities, all the order and organization, all that'll go. If we're the size of ants, we might pull through. But we're not. It's all too bulky to stop. That's the first certainty, eh?" I assented. "It is. I thought it out very well then. Next. At present, we're caught as we're wanted. A Martian has only to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run. And I saw one the other day out by Wandsworth, picking houses to pieces and routing among the wreckage. But they won't keep on doing that. As soon as they've settled all our guns and ships and smashed our railways and done all the things they were doing over here, they'll begin catching us systematic, picking the best, storing us in cages and things. That's what they'll start doing in a bit. Lord, they haven't even begun on us yet. Don't you see that? Not begun?" I exclaimed. "Not begun."
Nope.
And that's what's happened to us so far.
That's
happened to us.
The way I would be thinking about it is like that.
Having the sense to keep quiet.
Destroy
worrying them
destroy
with guns
means
and
of
such
transport.
foolery.
Destroy communications.
Off in crowds where their words
Destroy means of a retaliation.
They don't want to bother us yet.
Infrastructure.
They're making their thing. Making all the
economy.
things they couldn't bring with them. Getting things ready for the rest of their people. Very likely that's why the cylinders have stopped for a bit, for fear of hitting those who are here. And instead of our rushing about blind on the howl, or getting dynamite on the chance of busting them up, we got to fix ourselves up according to the new state of affairs. That's how I figure it out. It isn't quite according to what a man wants for his species, but it's about what the facts point to, and that's the principle I acted upon. Cities, nations, civilization, progress, it's all over. That game's up. We're beat. But if that is so, what is there to live for? The artilleryman looked at me for a moment. There won't be any more blessed concerts for a million years or so. There won't be any Royal Academy of the Arts and no nice little feeds at restaurants if it's amusement you're after. I reckon the game is up. If you got any drawing-room manners or dislike to eating peas with a knife or dropping H's, you better chuck 'em away for their use. You mean...
No more squeak!
Men like me are going on living. For the sake of the breed, I tell you, I'm grim set on living, and if I'm not mistaken, you'll show what insides you've got, too, before long. We aren't going to be exterminated, and I don't mean to be caught, either, and tamed and fattened and bred like a thundering ox. Oh, fancy those brown creepers. You don't mean to say I do? I'm going on, under their feet. I got it planned. I got it thought out. We men are beat. We don't know enough. We've got to learn before we get a chance, and we've got to live and keep independent while we learn. See, that's what has to be done. I stared, astonished and stirred profoundly by the man's resolution. "Great God!" cried I. "But you are a man indeed!" And suddenly I gripped his hand. "Hey!" he said, with his eyes shining. "I thought it out, eh?" "Go on," he said. "Well, those who mean to escape their catching must get ready. I'm getting ready, mind you. It isn't all of us that are made for wild beasts, and that's what it's got to be. That's why I watched you. I had my doubts. You're slender. I didn't know that it was you see, or just how you'd been buried. All these, the sort of people that lived in these houses, and all those damn little clocks that used to live down that way, be no good. They haven't any spirit in them, no proud dreams, no proud lusts, and a man who hasn't got one or the other, Lord, what is he but funk and precautions? They're just used to skedaddle off to work. I've seen hundreds of 'em, bit of breakfast in hand, running wild and shining to catch the little season ticket train. I fear they get dismissed if they didn't work in at businesses, that they were afraid to take the trouble to understand skedaddling back for fear they wouldn't be home in time for dinner, keeping indoors after dinner for fear of the back streets, and sleeping with the wives they married, not because they wanted them, but because they had a bit of money and make for safety in their one little miserable skedaddle through the world. Lives
anticlimactic,
and a bit invested for fear of accidents, and on Sunday fear the hereafter, as if hell was built for rabbits. Well, the Martians will be just a godsend to these nice room cages.
Trains like this
food, careful breeding
are this large because they don't know any better.
Fields and lands on empty stomachs.
Well, they need to transport this much cargo.
After a bit, they'll worry what people did before there were Martians to take care of them, the bar loafers and the marshes and the singers. I can imagine them. Oh, I can imagine them, he said, with a note of somber gratification. There'll be any amount of sentiment and religion loose on them. There's hundreds of things I saw with my eyes.
I accept your bachal.
I've begun to see
now
clearly
fall.
in a few days. There's lots will take things as they are, fat and stupid, and lots will be worried by a thing of feeling now that it's all wrong, and that they ought to be doing something. Not whether things are so that a lot of people feel they ought to be doing something. The weak and those who go weak with a lot of complicated thinking always make for a sort of do-nothing religion. Very pious and superior, and submit to persecution and the will of the Lord. Very likely you've seen the same thing. It's energy in a gale of funk, and you turn clean inside out. These cages will be full of psalms and hymns and piety, and those of a less simple sort will work in a bit of, what is it? Eroticism. He paused. Very likely these Martians will make pets of some of them, train them to do tricks. Who knows? Get set.
Actually, in the novel series Tripod,
some
and then in the show Tripod,
to
they kind of did.
No, I cried. That's impossible. No human
in the
being.
Tripod series, it kind of did.
On with such lives, said the artilleryman. There's men who do it cheerful, What nonsense to pretend there isn't. And I succumbed to his conviction. If they come after me, he said, Lord, if they come after me, and subsided into a grim meditation. I sat contemplating these things. I could find nothing.
Oh, damn Xenos!
Reasoning. In the days before the invasion, no one would have questioned my intellectual superiority to his. I, a professed and recognized writer on philosophical themes, and he a common soldier, and yet he had already formulated a situation that I had scarcely realized. "What are you doing?" I said presently. "What plans have you made?" He hesitated. "Well, it's like this," he said. "What have we to do? We have to invent a sort of life where men can live and breed and be sufficiently secure to bring the children up. Yes, wait a bit, and it'll make it a little clearer what I think ought to be done. The tame ones will all go like tame beasts. In a few generations they'll all be big, beautiful, rich-blooded, stupid rubbish. The risk is that we who keep wild will go savage, degenerate into a sort of big savage rat. You see, I mean to live as underground. I've been thinking about the drains. Of course, those who don't know drains think horrible things, but under this London are miles and miles, hundreds of miles, and a few days' rain and London empty will leave them sweet and clean. The main drains are big.
This servitor.
And there's cellars, vaults, stores from which bolting passageways may be made to the drains.
This dude, I was going to say idiot, but
subways.
kind of an idiot.
Begin to see. And we form a band, able-bodied, clean-minded men. We're not going to pick up any rubbish that drifts in. Weaklings go out again. And you meant me to go? Well, I parleyed, didn't I? We won't quarrel about that. Go on. Those who stop obey orders. Able-bodied, clean-minded women we want also. Mothers and teachers. No lackadaisical ladies. No blasted rolling eyes. You can't have any weak or silly. Life is real again. And the useless and cumbersome and mischievous have to die. They ought to die. They ought to be willing to die. It's a sort of disloyalty, after all, to live and taint the race. And they can't be happy. Moreover, dying's not so dreadful. It's the funkin' that makes it bad. And in all those palaces we shall gather. Our district will be London, and we may even be able to keep a watch and run about in the open when the Martians keep away. Play cricket, perhaps. That's how we shall save the race, eh? It's a possible thing. But saving the race is nothing in itself. As I say, that's only being rats. It's saving our knowledge and adding to it, that's the thing. There, men like you come in. There's books. There's models. We must make great, safe places down deep and get all the books we can. Not novels and poetry swipes, but ideas, science books. That's where men like you come in. You must go to the British Museum and pick all those books through. Especially we must keep up our science. Learn more. We must watch these Martians. Some of us must go as spies. When it's all working, perhaps I will. Get caught, I mean. And the great thing is, we must leave the Martians alone. We mustn't even steal. If we get in their way, we clear out. We must show them we mean them no harm. Yes, I know, but they're intelligent things. They won't hunt us down if they have all they want, and they think we're just harmless vermin. The artilleryman paused and laid.
He's kind of right there.
After all,
don't make yourself a nuisance to your enemy, and your enemy won't think you're an enemy.
Just imagine this, 4 or 5 their fighting machines suddenly starting off, heat rays right and left, and not a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, but men who've learned the way out. Maybe in my time, even those men. Fancy having one of them lovely things with its heat ray wide and free. Fancy having it in control.
Bloody
Holy
Xenos.
mother, you smashed to smithereens at the end of the run after a bust like that. I reckon the Martians will open their beautiful eyes. Can't you see them, man? Can't you see 'em hurrying, puffing and blowing and hooting to their other mechanical affairs? Something out of gear in every case, and swish, bang, rattle, swish.
Come on!
Over it, swish comes down the heat ray, and behold, man has come back to his own. For a while, the imaginative daring of the artilleryman and the tone of assurance and courage he assumed completely dominated my mind. I believed unhesitatingly both in his forecast of human destiny and in the practicability of his astonishing scheme, and the reader who thinks me
Give me my hammer!
must contrast his position, reading steadily with all his thoughts about the subject in mind,
That was
clearly
expensive.
in the bushes and listening.
Not monetarily, manpower-wise.
We talked in this manner through the early morning time, and later crept out of the bushes, and after scanning the sky for Martians, hurried.
Believe it or not, that officer,
his lair.
pretty good at
Whole cellar of the place.
at
When
a
I saw the work he had
insurgency,
spent a week upon, it
my
was a
opinion.
burrow scarcely 10 yards long, which he designed to reach into the main drain on Putney Hill, I had my first inkling of the gulf between his schemes and his powers. Such a hole I could have dug in a day, but I believed in him sufficiently to work with him all that morning, until past midday at his digging.
squig!
We had a garden barrow, and shot the earth we removed against the kitchen range. We refreshed ourselves with a
Nate!
tin of mock turtle soup and wine from the neighboring pantry. I found a curious relief.
I wouldn't actually
in
mind
the
trying turtle
strangeness
soup.
of the world in this steady labor.
Yes,
As we
I was always a
I
Shredder
turned
fan.
his project over in my mind, and
Actually, I was more of a Krang
presently
fan.
objections and doubts began to arise.
Try as you might,
I worked
Emperor
there all
protects.
the morning, so glad was I to find myself with a purpose again. After working an hour, I began to speculate on the distance one had to go before the cloaca was reached, the chances we had of missing it altogether. My immediate trouble was why we should dig this long.
It's almost like a lawnmower.
It's possible to get into the drain.
Not
at
far from it,
once
considering
down one
these
of the
little
manholes
gremlins.
and work back to the house. It
Not
seemed
actually
to me,
gremlins, more like
too, that
goblins,
the house
or
was inconvenient
as well, vegetable matter.
a needless length of tunnel.
Despite,
And
why is your
just
blood
as I
green?
was beginning to face these things, the artilleryman stopped digging and looked at me. "We're working well," he said. He put down his spade. "Let's knock off a bit. I think it's time we reconnoitered from the roof of the house."
Nice
We're
one.
going on, and after a little hesitation he resumed his spade, and then suddenly I was struck by a thought. I stopped, and so did he at once. "Why were you walking about the common," he said, "instead of being here?" "Taking the air," he said. "I was coming back. It's safer by night." "But the work?" "Oh, one can't always work," he said, and in a flash I saw the man plain. He hesitated, holding his spade. "But we ought to reconnoiter now, because if any come near they may hear the spades and drop down on us unaware." I was no longer disposed to the project. We went together to the roof and stood on a ladder peeping out through the roof door. No Martians were to be seen, and we ventured out onto the tiles and slipped down
Did he turn
under
cannibal?
the shelter of the parapet.
I forget.
From this position a shrubbery hid the greater portion of Putney, but we could see the river below, a bubbly mass
The
of
officer in
weed
the
and low parts of
in the
Lambeth
novel that we're
flooded
listening to.
and red. The red creepers
Did he turn
swarmed
traitor? I
up the
forget.
trees about the old palace, and their branches stretched, gaunt and dead, and set with shriveled
Oh, hammer,
leaves
hammer, hammer, or is
amid
it
its
power
cover.
axe? I forget
It
one.
was strange how
Screaming
entirely
eagle or
these things were
a roaring thunder. I
flowing water
forget.
for their propagation. About us neither had gained a footing. laburnums, pink maids,
Damn it, I wanted to jump.
and trees of
I guess Space
arbor
Marine
vitae
can't
rose
jump.
out of laurels and hydrangeas.
True, this white man can't
green
jump.
and brilliant.
Screaming Eagle.
Beyond Kensington, dense smoke was rising, and that and a blue haze hid the northward hills. The artilleryman began to tell me of the sort of people who still remained in London. "One night last week," he said, "some fools got the electric light in order, and there was all Regent Street and the circus ablaze, crowded with painted women dancing and shouting till dawn. A man who was there told me, and as the day came, they became aware of a fight the Langham, looking down at
Fear the power of humanity! Fear the power of the Emperor!
must have given some of them a nasty turn. He came right down the road toward them and picked up nearly 100, too drunk or frightened to run away. Grotesque gleam of a time no history will ever fully describe. From that, in answer to my questions, he came round to his grandiose plans again. He grew enthusiastic. He talked so eloquently of the possibility of capturing a fighting machine that I more than half believed him again. But now that I was beginning to understand something of his quality, I could divine the stress he laid on doing nothing precipitously. And I noted that now there was no great question that he personally was to capture and fight the great machine. After a while we went down into the cellar. Neither of us seemed disposed to resume digging, and when he suggested a meal I was nothing loath. He became suddenly very generous, and when we had eaten the night away and returned with some excellent cigars, we lit these, and his optimism glowed. He was inclined to regard my coming as a great occasion. "There's some champagne in the cellar," he said. "We can dig better on this Thameside Burgundy," said I. "No," said he, "I most today. Champagne, great God, we've had a heavy enough task before us. Let's take the rest and gather strength while we may. Look at these blistered hands." And pursuant to this idea of a holiday, he insisted upon playing cards after we had eaten. He taught me euchre, and after dividing London between us, I taking the northern side and he the southern, we played for parish points. Grotesque and foolish as all this will seem to the sober reader, it is absolutely true, and what is more remarkable, I found the card game and several others we played extremely interesting. Strange
Finally got an execution on him.
that with our on the edge of extermination or appalling degradation, with no clear prospect before us but the chance of
We are leaving! I'm having
following
fun
the
over here.
chance of
We are leaving. No, I'm having fun. We are leaving. I'm having
the
fun.
Joker with vivid.
We are. Who's the space
Afterwards, he taught me
marine?
poker, and I beat him
Spaceman
in a
here?
3 tough chess
Who's the
games.
spaceman? Who's
When
the blue boy?
Game we decided to take
Okay.
the lamp. After an interminable string of games, we supped, and the artilleryman
I
finished.
wonder how well this will play with Doom
We
music
went
on.
smoking the cigars. He was no longer the energetic regenerator of his species I had encountered this morning. He was still optimistic, but it was a less kinetic, a more thoughtful optimism. I remember he wound up with my health, proposed in a speech of small variety and considerable intermittence. I took a cigar, and went upstairs to look at the lights of which he had spoken, that blazed so greenly along the Highgate.
Servitor.
At first I stared unintelligently across the London valley. The northern hills
I gotta
were
say,
shrouded in
these
darkness. The fires near
The
Kensington,
Citadel cities and all that
now and
humanity
then,
builds
an
in
orange-red
40K,
tongue of
very
flame
defensible
flashed
if
up and vanished in the deep blue night.
from a
All
from
the
a
rest of London was black.
very defensible and
Nearer, I perceived a
very
strange
grandiose.
a pale violet purple
very,
fluorescent glow,
if not a little
under the night
underwhelming in
breeze.
technology.
For a space I could not understand it.
I know grimdark and everything,
And then
but still,
I knew what it must be.
but still,
The
very
red
defensible,
weed from which this faint
thick
irradiation proceeded.
structures.
With that realization and my
meant for
dormant sense of
meant to
wonder,
resist
my
heavy
sense of the proportion
orbital
of things
bombardment,
awoke again.
massive
From that
planetary
to Mars,
war.
red and clear, glowing high in the west. And
They
then
have a
long and earnestly
very much
the
a
darkness of
have much
Hampstead
practice
and Highgate.
at that kind of a building.
I remained a very long time upon the roof, wondering at the grotesque changes of the day.
Get your ass up
I
over
recalled
here.
my mental states from the midnight prayer to the foolish card playing. I had a violent revulsion of feeling. I remember I flung away the cigar with a certain wasteful symbolism. My folly came to me with glaring exaggeration. I seemed a traitor to my wife and to my kind. I was filled with remorse. I resolved to leave this strange, undisciplined dreamer of great things to his drink and gluttony, and to go on into London. There, it seemed to me, I had the best
And
chance
there
of doing what
is
the
basically
Martians
a
and
god
my
of death.
fellow men were doing. I was still
Or
upon the
might as well be to a humanity, because the technology to make those
end of
is
chapter
regarded
7,
as sacred.
Book 2 of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
To power one up takes weeks.
This is a LibriVox
And that's not
recording.
including
All
just
LibriVox
the
recordings are public domain.
the sacred
For more
rights.
information or to
Its
volunteer,
mechanics
please visit
has to go through
LibriVox.org.
that they believe actually
This
helps
reading
to
by
power
Shallenberg,
it and everything and activate it.
www.kray.org.
Yeah.
War of
When
the
I say
Worlds
technology
by
has been
H.G.
lost,
Wells. Book
and knowledge
2,
has been lost, I literally mean it.
Dead London. After I had parted from the artillery,
Science has
I
basically
went down the
become
hill
a form
and
of
by the High
religion.
Street across the bridge to Fulham. The red weed was tumultuous at that time, and nearly choked the bridge roadway, but its fronds were already whitened in patches by the spreading disease.
See, that's actually a guy's brain in there. That's actually their skull.
At the corner of the lane that runs
Operating
to
all
Putney Bridge
just that.
Station, I found a man lying. He was as black as a sweep with the black dust, alive.
They don't really know how to make
hopelessly
computers
and
anymore.
speechlessly drunk. I could get nothing from him but curses and furious lunges at my head. I think I should have stayed by him, but for the brutal expression of his face.
Still don't know why they don't strap a
There was black
basically,
dust along the roadway from the bridge onwards,
some
and it grew thicker in
rockets to them
Fulham.
and just blast them up.
The streets were horribly quiet. I got food, sour, hard, and mouldy, but quite eatable, in a baker's shop here. Some way
I'm seeing
towards
flashy
Wall
red.
Street
That
became
means
clear
servitor.
powder, and I passed a white terrace of houses on fire. The noise of the burning was an absolute relief. Going on towards Brompton, the streets were quiet again. Here I came once more upon the black powder in the streets, and upon dead bodies.
This rigmarole.
I saw altogether
Get
about
your
a dozen in the
asses
length
over
of the
here.
Fulham Road. They had been dead many days, so that I hurried quickly past them. The black powder covered them over and softened their outlines. One or two had been disturbed by dogs. Where there was no black powder, it was curiously like a Sunday in the city, with the closed shops, the houses locked up and the blinds drawn, the desertion, and the stillness. In some places plunderers had been at work, but rarely at other than the provision and wine shops. A jeweller's window had been broken open in one place, but apparently the thief had been
Welcome
disturbed,
to a computer.
and a number of gold chains and a watch
Yeah,
lay
basically
scattered on the
analog.
pavement. I did not trouble to touch them. Farther on was a tattered woman in a heap on a doorstep. The hand that hung over her knee was gashed and bled down her rusty brown dress, and a smashed magnum of champagne formed a pool across
They
the
just
pavement.
It just won't
She
let
seemed
you out of
asleep.
its sight, will it?
But she was dead. The farther I penetrated into London, the profounder
I'm not
grew the
impressed.
stillness.
My marauder can take
was
it
not
out.
so much the stillness of death.
It'll take
It was
weeks
the
for that thing to
stillness
wake
of
up. Mine
suspense,
takes, say,
of
minutes.
expectation.
Takes seconds for it to overheat.
At any time, the
milliseconds
destruction
for
that
my
had
marauder to
already
overheat.
singed
But hey,
the northwestern
I run hot.
borders of the metropolis, and had annihilated Ealing and Kilburn, might strike among these houses and leave them smoking ruins.
But then again, I don't know.
It was a
That
thing
thing has been
condemned
through
and
I don't know how
derelict.
many battles.
In South Kensington the streets were clear of dead and of black powder. It was near South Kensington that I first heard the howling. It crept almost imperceptibly upon my senses. It was a sobbing alternation of two notes, "Oola, oola, oola, oola," keeping on perpetually. When I passed streets that ran northward, it grew in volume, and houses and buildings seemed to deaden and cut it off again. It came in a full tide down Exhibition Road. Staring
like that.
towards Kensington Gardens, wondering at this strange
I'm
remote
seeing red
wail.
flashies.
It was as if that mighty desert of houses had found a voice for its fear and solitude. "Oola, oola,
I wonder what that
oola,
writ
oola,"
says.
wailed that superhuman.
Probably the prayer of how
Great waves
to
of
operate
sound
it.
sweeping down the broad,
Yeah, not kidding.
lit roadway between the tall buildings on each side. I turned northwards.
Or the prayer
marveling,
you say
towards
to
the iron gates
the
of
prayer
Hyde
you
Park.
use before
I had
activating
half
it.
a mind to break into the Natural History Museum and find my way up to the summits of the towers in order to see across the park. But I decided to keep to the ground, where quick hiding was possible, and so went on
this an
up the
ambush?
Exhibition Road.
I don't actually. I've gotten this far, but I don't
All the
remember if
large
this is an ambush
mansions
or
on
not.
each side of the road were empty and still, and my footsteps echoed
Yeah, they're not
against
shooting,
the
so not an
sides of the
ambush.
houses. At the top, near the park gate, I came upon a strange sight.
Thread.
A bus overturned, and the skeleton of a horse picked clean. I puzzled over this for a
Maintenance.
time, and then went on to the bridge over the Serpentine. The voice
That
grew
is
stronger
actually
and
just
stronger,
an emblem.
though I could
believe
see
of the
nothing above the
Mechanicus.
housetops on the north side of the park, save a haze of smoke to the northwest. "Ulla, ulla, ulla, ulla!" cried the voice, coming as
And that
it
is where we learn of a
from the district
MacGuffin.
about Regent's Park. The desolating cry worked upon
And
my
now we are paired
the
with a
mood that had
psyker.
sustained me passed.
Basically,
The wailing took possession of me.
a
I
psychic
found I was intensely weary, footsore, and now again
basically
hungry and thirsty.
can just cause all types of
It
chaos
was
if he
already
doesn't
past
keep
noon.
his psychic powers under
Why
control.
was I wandering alone in this city of
And by
the
chaos,
dead?
I literally mean
Why was
the
I
idea of
alone when
chaos.
all London was lying in state, and
Die.
I felt intolerably lonely. My mind ran
care.
on old friends that I had forgotten for years. I thought of the poisons in the chemists' shops, of the liquors the wine merchants stored. I recalled the two sodden creatures of despair who, so far as I knew,
I'm taking
shared
shots at
the
this
city
dude.
with myself. I came into Oxford Street by the Marble Arch, and here again were black powder.
Fine, if you
several
want
bodies,
in
and
on
an
this.
evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. I grew very thirsty after the heat of my long walk. With infinite trouble I managed to break into a public house and get food and drink. I was weary after eating, and went into the parlour behind the bar, and slept on a black horsehair sofa I found there. I awoke to find that dismal howling still in my ears. "Ulla, ulla, ulla, ulla!" It was now dusk, and after I had routed out some biscuits and a cheese in the bar, there was a meat safe, but it contained nothing but maggots, I wandered on through the silent residential squares to Baker Street. Portman Square is the only one I can name, and so came out at last upon Regent's Park.
Baker Square.
And as I emerged from the
Baker
top of
Street.
Baker Street, I saw far
right
away
there.
over the trees, in the clearness of
I
the
guessed
sunset,
it right.
the hood of the Martian giant from which this howling proceeded. I was not terrified. I came upon
I
him
do got to
as
say,
if it
for
were a wild horse. I watched him for
what
some
was it,
time, but he did
Spielberg's
not
War of the
move.
Worlds movie
He
not
appeared
being
to
War
be
of the Worlds?
standing and yelling.
I very much
For no reason
very
that I
much
could
like
discover.
the depiction of the Martian fighting machines.
I tried to formulate a plan of action.
The
That
Martian war
perpetual
machines.
sound of "Ulla, ulla,
Especially
ulla,
that
ulla,"
oola, oola, oola.
confused my mind. Perhaps I was too
plasma
tired to be
pistol.
very fearful. Certainly I was more curious to know the reason of this monotonous crying than afraid. I turned back away from the park and struck into Park Road, intending to skirt the park, went along under the shelter of the terraces, and got a view of this stationary, howling Martian from the direction of St. John's Wood. A couple of 100 yards out of Baker Street, I heard a yelping chorus and saw, first a dog with a piece of putrescent red meat in his jaws coming headlong towards me, and then a pack of starving mongrels in pursuit of him. He made a wide curve to avoid me, as though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. As the yelping died away down the silent road, the wailing sound of "Ulla, ulla, ulla, ulla" reasserted itself.
Yeah, I like the deep going.
I came upon the wrecked handling machine halfway to
Oh,
St.
great.
John's Wood Station.
We kind of got like...
At first I thought a house had fallen across the road. It was only as I clambered among the ruins that I saw, with a start, this mechanical Samson lying, with its tentacles bent and smashed and twisted,
Where's that?
among the ruins it had made. The forepart was shattered.
Now that
Seemed
ability
as
to
if it
warp
had
in
driven
is
blindly
chaos.
straight at the house,
Got like some sort
and
of
had been
chaos
overwhelmed in its overthrow.
Chaos mage.
It seemed to me then that this might have happened by a handling
caster
machine
thing.
escaping
I don't know
from
the term
guidance
for
of
it.
the Martian. I could not
But we got a
clamber
summoner
among the
here.
ruins to see it,
Get y'all asses
and
on
the
here.
twilight was now so far advanced that the blood with which its seat was smeared, and the gnawed gristle of the Martian that the dogs had left, were invisible to me. Wondering still more at all that I had seen, I pushed on towards Primrose Hill. Far away, through a gap in the
Go away,
trees,
fly.
I saw a second Martian, as motionless as the first, standing in the park towards the zoological gardens, and silent. A little beyond the ruins about the smashed handling machine, I came upon the red weed again.
And
Regent's
after
Canal,
this, I
a
think
spongy
after
mass
this,
of dark
what we're
red
about to do, I
vegetation.
think I'm going to call it quits because we're getting close to
As I crossed the bridge,
quitting
the sound
time.
of "Ulla, ulla, ulla, ulla" ceased. It was, as it were, cut off. The silence came like a thunderclap.
Saving content.
The dusky houses about me stood faint and tall and dim. The trees towards the park were growing black. All about me the red weed clambered among the ruins, writhing to get above me in the dimness. Night, the mother of fear and mystery, was coming upon me. But while that voice sounded, the solitude, the desolation, had been endurable. By virtue of it, London had still seemed alive, and the sense of life about me had upheld me. Then suddenly a change, the passing of something, I knew not what, and then a stillness that could be felt. Nothing but this gaunt quiet. London about me gazed at me spectrally. The windows in the white houses were like the eye sockets of skulls.
Going down!
About me my imagination found 1,000 noiseless enemies moving. Terror seized me, a horror of my temerity. In front of me the road became pitchy black, as though it was tarred, and I saw a contorted shape lying across the pathway. I could not bring myself to go on. I turned down St. John's Wood Road, and ran headlong from this unendurable stillness towards Kilburn. I hid from the night and the silence, until long after midnight, in a cabman's shelter in Harrow Road. But before the dawn my courage returned, and while the stars were still in the sky, I turned once more towards Regent's Park. I missed my way among the streets, and presently saw down a long avenue, in the half-light of the early dawn, the curve of Primrose Hill. On the summit, towering up to the fading stars, was a third Martian, erect and motionless like the others. An insane resolve possessed me. I would die and end it, and I would save myself even the trouble of killing myself. I marched on recklessly towards this Titan, and then, as I drew nearer, and the light grew, I saw that a multitude of black birds was circling and clustering about the hood. At that my heart gave a bound, and I began running along the road. I hurried through the red weed that choked St. Edmund's Terrace. I waded breast high across a torrent of water that was rushing down from the waterworks towards the Albert Road, and emerged upon the grass before the rising of the sun. Great mounds had been heaped about the crest of the hill, making a huge redoubt of it. It was the final and largest place the Martians had made. And from behind these heaps there rose smoke against the sky. Against the skyline an eager dog ran and disappeared. The thought that had flashed into my mind grew real, grew credible. I felt no fear, only a wild, trembling exultation as I ran up the hill towards the motionless monster. Out of the hood hung lank shreds of brown, at which the hungry birds pecked and tore. In another moment I had scrambled up the earthen rampart and stood upon its crest, and the interior of
Maybe we can go a little bit longer.
A mighty space it was, with gigantic machines here and there within it, huge mounds of material and strange...
Go away, fly.
And scattered about it...
Yeah, that was a lot...
their overturned war machines, some in the now rigid handling machines, and a dozen of them, stark and silent and laid in a row, were the Martians.
This is kind of where I got...
dead, slain by the
frustrated
putrefactive and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared, slain as the red weed was being slain, slain after all man's devices had failed by the humblest things that God, in his wisdom, has put upon this earth. For so it had come about, as indeed I and many men might have foreseen, had not terror and disaster blinded our minds. These germs of disease have taken toll of humanity since the beginning of things, taken toll of our pre-human ancestors since life began here. But by virtue of this natural selection of our kind we have developed resisting power. To no germs do we succumb without a struggle, and to many, those that cause putrefaction in dead matter, for instance, our living frames are altogether immune. But there are no bacteria in Mars, and directly these invaders arrived, directly they drank and fed, our microscopic allies began to work their overthrow. Already when I watched them they were irrevocably doomed, dying and rotting, even as they went to and fro. It was inevitable. By the toll of 1 billion deaths man has bought his birthright of the earth, and it is his against all comers. It would still be his were the Martians 10 times as mighty as they are, for neither do men live nor die in vain. Here and there they were scattered, nearly 50 altogether, in that great gulf they had made, overtaken by a death that must have seemed to them as incomprehensible as any death could be. To me also at that time this death was incomprehensible. All I knew was that these things that had been alive and so terrible to men were dead. For a moment I believed that the destruction of Sennacherib had been repeated, that God had repented, that the angel of death had slain them in the night. I stood staring into the pit, and my heart lightened gloriously, even as the rising sun struck the world to fire about me with his rays. The pit was still in darkness. The mighty engines, so great and wonderful in their power and complexity, so unearthly in their tortuous forms, rose weird, vague, and strange out of the shadows towards the light. A multitude of dogs, I could hear, fought over the bodies that lay darkly in the depth of the pit far below me. Across the pit, on its farther lip, flat and vast and strange, lay the great flying machine with which they had been experimenting upon our denser atmosphere when decay and death arrested them. Death had come not a day too soon. At the sound of a cawing overhead I looked up at the huge fighting machine that would fight no more forever, at the tattered red shreds of flesh that dripped down upon the overturned seats on the summit of Primrose Hill. I turned and looked down the slope of the hill to where, enhaloed now in birds, stood those other two Martians that I had seen overnight, just as death had overtaken them. The one had died, even as it had been crying to its companions. Perhaps it was the last to die, and its voice had gone on perpetually until the force of its machinery was exhausted. They glittered now, harmless tripod towers of shining metal, in the brightness of the rising sun. All about the pit, saved as by a miracle from everlasting destruction, stretched the great Mother of Cities. Those who have only seen London veiled in her sombre robes of smoke can scarcely imagine the naked clearness and beauty of the silent wilderness of houses. Eastward, over the blackened ruins of the Albert Terrace and the splintered spire of the church, the sun blazed dazzling in a clear sky, and here and there some facet in the great wilderness of roofs caught the light and glared with a white intensity.
Dang-nabbit!
Northward were Kilburn and Hampstead, blue and crowded with houses. Westward the great city was dimmed, and southward, beyond the Martians, the green waves of Regent Street,
I will
the Langham
get that.
Hotel, the dome of the Albert Hall, the Imperial Institute, and the
Ew.
giant mansions of the Brompton Road came out clear and little in the sunrise, the jagged ruins of Westminster rising hazily beyond. Far away and blue
No, other one,
were
eh?
the Surrey hills, and the towers of the Crystal Palace glittered like two silver rods. The dome of St. Paul's was dark against the sunrise, and injured, I saw for the first time, by a huge gaping cavity on its western side. And as I looked at this wide expanse of houses and factories and churches, silent and abandoned, as I thought of the multitudinous hopes and efforts, the innumerable hosts of lives that had gone to build this human reef, and of the swift and ruthless destruction that had hung over it all, when I realized that the shadow had been rolled back, and that men might still live in the streets, and this dear, vast, dead city of mine be once more alive and powerful, I felt a wave of emotion that was near.
Oh, please tell me, Hammer.
Tears. The torment was over. Even that day the healing would begin. The survivors of the people scattered over the country, leaderless, lawless, foodless, like sheep.
Plasma shotgun!
Thousands who had fled by sea would begin to return. The pulse of life, growing stronger and stronger, would beat again in the empty streets and pour across the vacant squares. Whatever destruction was done, the hand of the destroyer was stayed.
Hello, my good friend. How are you doing?
The grass of the hill would presently be echoing with the hammers of the restorers and ringing with the tapping of their trowels. At the thought, I extended my hands toward the sky and began thanking God. In a year, thought I, in a year. With overwhelming force came the thought of myself, of my wife,
Lectin
and
servo
the old life
skulls.
of hope and tender helpfulness that had ceased forever. End of Book 2, Chapter 8. Read by Kara Shallenberg on December 25th, 2005, in Oceanside, California.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please contact LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter Yearsley. War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Book 2, Chapter 9, Wreckage. And now comes the strangest thing in my story. Yet perhaps it is not altogether strange. I remember, clearly and coldly and vividly, all that I did that day until the time that I stood weeping
Going up.
and praising God upon the summit of Primrose Hill.
I didn't say
And
anything
then
about saving,
forget.
so...
Of the next 3 days I know nothing. I have learned since that
What do we get?
so
What do we
far
get?
from my being the first discoverer of the Martian overthrow,
Well, it
several
just saved,
such wanderers
folks,
as myself
so...
had already.
I am going to have to say... I'm going to have to say this is the end of the episode. And that I also apologize that I could not get the audio or the cinematics of this game working proper. Ugh, where did this come from? Something doesn't want me to apologize. As I was saying, I apologize that I couldn't get the audio to this game, as well as the cinematics to work properly. I don't know what's wrong. This apparently was a bad port of the game, so... I'll probably continue with the game, but hey... You never know. But anyways, do what you normally do at the end of these episodes, because I know I will. Until next time. No, I don't think I will do my catchphrase. Until next time, folks. Catch you on the bounce. Later.